Okay, so we're gonna make some masa, which essentially is basically raw, like cornmeal, but it's been nixtamalized. And I'm not a food scientist or anything, but I can tell you that traditionally it was done with wood ash. And what the wood ash does with the cornmeal is it converts the starch into the cornmeal into starch that is edible and digestible for humans and also releases the nutrients. So if we go back in time and we think about the discovery of the New World, the Spanish came and they went back to Spain and started immediately producing corn in Spain, where it was not nixtamalized at all. They had pre-existing biases toward the Native Americans, and they thought we were stupid for putting ashes in our corn. So they forgot about that part. They completely negated anything about that. I'm gonna add a little bit of sage, some dried sage in here, because I wanna give these a little taste of the region here of the South. And essentially what happened was, it caused a famine in Spain to the point where people were sick and they didn't know what had happened and they didn't know what the thing was. And what they had left out was the part of nixtamalizing the corn so the nutrient components would be released. And so I just feel like that's a cautionary tale toward, you know, pay attention when people are doing things and have been doing things for hundreds of thousands of years, because they might actually know what they're talking about. But you grab some salt really quick to put in here. And I want to be honest with everybody. I've never made these this way before. I've always made them using traditional, like just plain cornmeal. Modern, we would have them a lot when I was growing up. But I wanted to try it with this masa because this would have been a pre-contact way of making corn and storing corn, and also releasing all the nutrient components so that people got the most benefit out of it. I'm surprised that it absorbs a lot of water. What I'm trying to do is make a dough. I'm going to use some duck fat. Traditionally before, like I said, before colonization, we would have had passenger pigeons and the like that we would have been eating, and they would have had a lot of poultry fats that we fried in because it has a high smoke point. I'm going to stir up this duck fat and put just a little of that in it because I want to add just a little fat content to it. But I don't necessarily want to use butter because I don't want that flavor of butter. I don't want to use lard or shortening. So we're going to put just a little of that. And I'm going to go in here with my hands now. And I'm going to mix this. It feels really silky and smooth. It's obviously a finer grind. I would say that this is more akin to a corn flour than it is to a corn meal. What I want to do is make like little dumplings. Let's see if it's going to stick together. It does stick together. Make a little dumpling, and I'm going to make like not a donut, but I'm going to make a divot in the center where it's the thickest so that it can cook evenly. Because if not, I just have a worry that it's going to be still a little doughy. And I'm going to go back to my word gummy in the center. So this is, I think, in Mexico, things like this are very traditional. I know that I grew up eating these. People put them in fish. They put them in peas. I know like with catfish stew or any kind of freshwater fish or saltwater fish, corn dumplings like this were made and they were stewed all day, especially back in the days when you had wood cook stoves. The temperature could be just set on there and it was like on low all day long. Those dumplings, they would cook to the point where the fish bones and everything had disintegrated. and it created like a really thick broth full of collagen from the bones disintegrating. I think that's plenty for what we're doing today. And we're gonna go ahead and put those in the broth and let those start cooking. Okay, so we have a pot of broth here that's boiling. I'm just gonna lay these dumplings into the broth and just let them just simmer for about 15-20 minutes until they're cooked through. And we're gonna have some cornmeal dumplings on chicken broth. So we have collard greens that are one of the most popular vegetables right now in our culture. I think it's because they were easy to grow. They grew all year long in this particular climate. They will grow in the middle of winter. One thing to tell you the difference, these are store-bought collards. And you can buy collards anywhere. I know when I've lived away, my best source to get the best collards was always Whole Foods and to buy organic. But if you don't have that, this will work. This stem that goes through your collard here, if these were a field-grown collard, if this were a locally grown collard green that you just went out and collected, and one more cravat to that, if it had frosted on them, because the frost changes the sugar molecules inside of the leaf of the plant, and it makes it sweeter. And it also tenderizes it because of the slight freeze. If you think of an ice cube, when you freeze ice, it expands. And then when it thaws, it goes back down again. If you think this collard's outside and it freezes, every bit of the water in this collard green is going to expand because of that frost. What that's gonna do, it's gonna create extra holes in the molecules on a little tiny layer inside of the plant, which will mean it'll actually cook up more tender and it'll be sweeter because the sugars will be more readily available when you cook it. But if you have a fresh collard that you grew yourself, if you want to plant collards and grow them in your own garden, you can do this process without cutting out the stem. You can eat them. You're not going to be able to distinguish the stem from the leaf. Sometimes on cooking shows, or you see people cooking and they always request that you cut out the stem. Growing up, we didn't have that hesitation or that information because we were able to eat the stems. Because the stems, you see when I hit it with a knife, you can hear it. You can tell it's really tough. It shouldn't sound like that. It should be full of water. It should be really tender. But like I said, these are commercially grown. They were bought in a supermarket. And so you're just not able, I mean, you could cook it and eat it, but it's gonna be really crunchy and really fibrous and not easily digestible. So I would say cut your stems out, especially on big leaves like this, which this is a small leaf for Lumbee collards. These are really tiny. But what I'm gonna go through here really quick, and I'm gonna devein these collard greens, and it won't take but a few minutes to do it here. But once we've got a stack, I'll show you right now. Once we've got a stack like this, you want to lay them out on top of each other. We're going to roll them like you would a cigar. Pretend you're in Cuba at the cigar factory and you're rolling tobacco leaves tight as you can roll them to create a cylinder, a tight cylinder. You want to take that cylinder and start at the tip and just start cutting through, and we would just say that we're slicing them. We'd say you're going to slice the collards really thin. But since Food Network and we're all fancy now, we call it chiffonade, which is French for slice thin. So anyway, you just want them sliced really thin. And you're going to do this to your entire batch of collards. And if you notice, I have not completely dried these collards off. I've allowed the water to stay accumulated on them. That's by design. That's on purpose. It's not accidental. That's going to be the cooking liquid because we're going to do something where we call it in our area, once again, if you are in France, you may call it sauté. You might say, we're going to sauté the collards. But where we live at, we call it frying the collards because they're going to go into oil in a pan with no additional water, and they're just going to be fried with the own moisture that's already inherent in the green. These commercially grown collards that you purchase at the grocery store, I'm not sure of the name. Like, I know some grocery stores will say that the collards are local or they're locally grown, but there's just as much potential that these collards came from Florida or California as anywhere else. And so we used to have a collard called cabbage collard, and the only reason why it was called cabbage collard is because it made a big head that almost looked like a cabbage when it was growing in the field. It wasn't that it tasted like cabbage, it was that it resembled cabbage the way it looked. But there's multitudes of varieties of collard greens. I can't tell you from my personal experience if there's any taste difference between any of the ones. I think they're all pretty similar. So anyway, this is the last of our collards that we're doing here. You just want them thin because the whole process of frying these, or sauteing them if you want to use a more sort of culinary term, is that it happens really fast. These are not a long, slow boil the way you typically see greens cooked. You know, if you're in the Caribbean, you may see greens cooked in coconut milk, and they're cooked all day long. Or, you know, if you were in other parts of the South, you may see greens cooked in a broth with a big piece of ham meat or salt pork, and they are cooked all day long. These are cooked in 10 minutes. As soon as they wilt down and they go completely limp, they are ready to eat. So these are all chiffonaded, and we're going to get ready to go over to the stove, and we're going to go ahead and cook these up. So we're going to fry the collards now, and like literally we're going to fry the collards, which is, like I said, a different technique from stewing the collards, boiling them. This is a cheat. I'm using Bacon Up, which is a bacon fat. You could certainly have your own bacon grease, but I'm going to put just a little bacon fat in the hot skillet and let it get going. And then I want to put, once that melts enough, I'm going to toast just a few grains of pepper flakes. And pepper would have been something that we would have had prior to colonization. It was available. But we just want to fry up. You don't want to burn it, but you just want to get enough heat on it that you can start smelling that pepper. And at that point, you may want to stand back or turn down your heat. I'm going to turn down the heat to low. And as you see, we just have the collards that have the residual moisture on them. You're going to hear them when I put them in the pan. That's the sound that you want to hear. And so that sound you hear, that's the frying part. That's how we know that they're frying. And if you notice here, I'm stacking up this pan. You're going to say, there's no way all those collards are going into that pan. We're going to put them in there anyway, whether it wants it or not. And if there's any water, this time I don't happen to have any water off the collards, but if there were, you'd take that little bit of water and you would pour it into your pan. This is probably the simplest way to cook greens that you're ever going to know about or hear about. You're just going to put a little salt. Some people would put sugar at this point to make them a little sweeter, especially since these are not in season. They're out of season collards and they're store-bought collards. So they may have a slightly more bitter taste than a sweet taste, but that's going to be okay. We're going to put the lid on. It doesn't matter if we have stragglers that are out of the pot. You just want to put the lid on and let those fry. Now, I'm going to use another old Lumbee word. Not a real word, I don't think, but it possibly is a real word. We call it swage. The old people would say you have to let these swage down, but things can swage up too. Like if you hit your toe might swage up. which means it would swell. Just the same way, like if you go on a diet, your stomach may swage down. So that word can be used different ways. I don't even know if it's a real word, but in the Lumbee dialect, it is a real word. So these need to swage down enough that they can go in here. They'll be contained in the pot. Collards, I think, culturally for Lumbees, were a free food. It was something that was a commodity that you had outside, you could grow yourself. Seeds were, you could buy a nickel's worth of seeds and plant more collards than your family could eat. I know personally in my family, my dad did not like collards, but because they were a food that grew all winter long, and my mother could go to the field every day and cut a collard and make it for dinner, collards were a daily occasion in my house because it was a green. And that was rotated with mustard greens, turnip greens, mesclun. There's a couple more that Dad would plant, but primarily it was collards. And what has happened recently, I would say in the last few years, collards have made a transition out of being sort of like a poor person's food or maybe a regional sort of like specialty, more into the mainstream. And I think kale had a lot to do with that once kale became popular and it was brought into the mainstream. And then it became available at every supermarket all over America. So people started making collards. And I think that's when they started substituting collard greens with other greens that were not available. And they were able to make dishes, things like collard wraps or collard egg rolls, or just different things where you would use a different green, but you may use collards instead. I know personally, I've made saag out of them, an Indian saag paneer, which I love, paneer cheese, Indian cheese. It's one of my favorite things to eat if I go have Indian. I've made those with collards before, and it's actually very good to use collards to do it. Obviously, it has a different flavor profile, but now, if you notice, like in this case, that these are not wilting down quickly enough, I'm gonna put maybe 2 tablespoons of water into them. I don't want much. I want enough to generate steam, not enough to boil them. I just want to create some steam to cause those to wilt. And there we go. I put the lid back on, and I'm going to let that do its magic and just wilt down. And we'll come back and stir these periodically, but that's pretty much all you do to make collards. And you can come back and add water. Like I said, you want to create enough steam for them to wilt, but you do want to keep the characteristic frying. That's very important for the way that we cook greens. And let's say you're doing this at home. You don't have to do it this basic. I would say this is your foundation recipe. It's the easiest one. You can certainly add any other things in here you want. Like if you wanted to add a little garlic, a little onion, you could do that. You could put a little vinegar in it. You could put a little sugar in it. So there's different things that you could do to it.
Since he's got that open, I'm just getting a quick little deal.
Okay, those can just cook. And let's, while those are cooking, let me just check this. Okay, we're gonna serve one of these dumplings with a little broth. And I think they've turned out beautiful. I hope they taste as good as they look, but it's a beautiful little dumpling and some really rich chicken broth. And this dumpling is made out of masa, which is nixtamalized corn, which means it has been alkalized. The corn has been alkalized to convert the sugars and starches into a format that your body can readily absorb and accept. So I'll put that there, and then I'm gonna serve up some of the pastry while this flour bread is continuing to cook. That's for dessert, so we got a little time before we got to get that. Let's get a little bit of these collards. I don't want a lot. Little collards. And here's the chicken and pastry. Lid back on here, and I have a little bit of pepper vinegar. It's hot peppers that have been marinating in vinegar, and I'm going to give my collard greens just a little shot of that to get some heat. Apple cider vinegar, that's something that would have been readily available for our ancestors. They would have collected fruit when it was harvested, when it was ripe, but you always had leftovers. You have more than what you could use. And the same way you make wine or you make any kind of beers or anything like that, you let it ferment, the yeast comes up on it. That's the way vinegar's made. It was a way to preserve things. So they could have taken the apples and made apple cider vinegar very readily. And peppers are native to the Americas prior to colonization. They were traded all over the Americas and South America. So having peppers preserved in an apple cider vinegar would have been a very easy transition and a way to save that pepper flavor and to save that heat for parts of the wintertime when you maybe didn't have those foods readily available. It was also a way to get vitamin C because peppers are loaded with vitamin C. And so in the wintertime when things were scarce and you were eating a lot of dry foods and things that were not fresh, and maybe a lot of protein because you may have been eating a lot of meat, you could get your vitamin C by having some pepper sauce. I'm going to try this broth. That's rich and salty and savory and good. It's good. It's definitely a different texture from what I grew up eating. But in a way, I think I may prefer this to what I grew up eating because they're not as dense. These are much lighter. It's definitely corn. Very, very much a corn flavor. Very good. Stick to your ribs kind of food. I think you could have a bowl of these and work all day outside in the wintertime and you'd be great to go. Let's try some of the collard greens. Bitter. If I had it to go back again and I made these, I might add the addition of some honey or some syrup or sugar. I often will use cane syrup, which is used a lot in this area, to sweeten greens. And they're not bad. They have a distinctive collard taste that's very pungent, maybe the word, very strong. And the chicken and pastry just takes me back to my childhood. I possibly put too much pepper in it. So it is very, very peppery, but it has a good flavor. And anyway, I hope you guys try these sometimes. They're really great dishes, and I hope that some of this information spurs your memories of your own food histories and of your own family, and maybe opens up a door of curiosity or interest to you that maybe you do want to go back and grab grandma's recipes and start reinvestigating those and seeing where they might take you. And it's fun to do, and it's fun to eat.